welcome to Lecture 9. Today we're covering two critical question types. First, command of evidence, and secondly, purpose or function questions. These questions test whether you can identify why authors include specific information and what evidence supports their claim. We'll cover the command of evidence questions and their way of finding contextual support. Then we'll look at purpose and function questions, and this is about why authors include specific details and some strategies for the LCAT, and then some common traps. Okay, let's master these high value questions. The first thing to note is what is the question format. So you'll be given questions like which quotation from the text most effectively illustrates the claim. This is kind of question you can expect. Okay, now let's look at the strategy. So for these kinds of questions, the best strategy and the best way to work through them is to read the passage completely. Again, this is something that is been repetitive in all of my strategies, and this is something that you have to understand as well. So before completely reading the passages, you cannot create your correct answer. So this is very key to the entirety of the LCAT. To read the passages completely. Second thing is to read the claim carefully, right? So in the passage, the claim would be stated either directly, explicitly, or implicitly. And when you read through that, you have to create a claim in the back of your mind, right? Then the third thing is to find the evidence in the passage that directly supports the claim. So now for the evidence type questions, you need to find an evidence for your claim, right? So underline the evidence that you think is true for the claim that you are finding out, right? And the last thing is to match the evidence to the options, the exact quotations, okay? So I will go through an example so that you'll be able to understand what kind of questions I'm talking about here right now. So in studying ant colonies, biologist Debro Gordon discovered that ant behavior is not directed by central authority. Instead, ants make decisions based on local information and simple interactions with nearby ants. When food is scarce, foraging ants slow down and they return to the nest less frequently. Other ants notice this pattern and adjust their behavior accordingly. This decentralized system enables colonies to adapt quickly to changing conditions without requiring any individual ant to understand the overall strategy. Which quotation from the text most effectively illustrates the claim that the ant colonies operate without centralized control? Now, this is the idea, and you have to find the quotation that illustrates this idea, that is the evidence for this idea, right? So let's identify the main claim that ant colonies operate without any decentralized control system, right? Now, what is the best evidence that we can find for this quotation? That's basically that we need proof that there is no central authority directing ants. So let's see if any of our options are talking about this fact. So option A is in studying ant colonies, biologist Deborah Gordon discovered that ant behavior is not directed by central authority. Now, not this directly states the claim. Okay, this says that it is not directed by central authority, which is something that we want to answer. So this there isn't something that is specifically incorrect about this. So I'm just going to keep this for now. The next one is when food is scarce, foraging ants slow down and return to the nest less frequently. Now, although this is accurate and it is taken from the passage, but it's an example which is not directly prove lack of central control, right? This doesn't say that how are they insinuating each other and how are they signaling each other. So this is again not the answer that we're looking for, although this might sound correct. And the next one is Other ants notice this pattern and adjust their behavior accordingly. Now, ants adjusting this behavior, this is not again a direct proof or something, although this might hint that they do not require a centralized control system, yet they are noticing each other's pattern, right? And this doesn't say if they are only noticing each other's pattern. There might be some other way of communicating this, okay? This is not clearly and directly stating what we want. And the next one is that this decentralized system allows colonies to adapt quickly to changing conditions. Now, this describes the result, but we want a direct evidence that is given by option A, right? So we see that while D also mentions decentralized, where now you might get an idea that maybe it is mentioning the decentralized system. This is exactly what we're looking for, right? It is important to note that while it mentions this word, option A is directly, explicitly stating the central lack of central authority, right? So we want to choose the evidence that directly states or clearly demonstrates the claim, not just restates the topic. Okay? So now that we understand how to approach these questions, let's go through another example together. So we have to identify the best support in this passage. Mary Tharp's groundbreaking work in ocean cartography revolutionized the understanding of Earth's geology. Working with limited access to research vessels due to gender discrimination, Tharp analyzed data collected by her male colleagues. In 1952, she discovered evidence of a continuous rift valley running through the Atlantic Ocean. Her maps revealed that this drift was a part of a massive underwater mountain range extending 40,000 miles around the globe. Initially dismissed by scientific establishment, Thorpe's work eventually became foundational evidence for the theory of plate tectonics. Now, this is about science, and you can expect these kind of messages to appear in the LCAT most commonly because it isn't the LUMS administration and admission committee is not testing you about science in other ways. So this is kind of an evidence for them that you can analyze scientific topics and you can understand them. Okay, so I predict that would be very, very common in the upcoming tests. So be aware of that. Okay, so let's again go to, we have gone through the question, and the main claim is that that Tharp's groundbreaking work was initially dismissed, and later it became a foundational evidence for this understanding of scientific phenomena, right? So let's look at our options. And the question says, which quotation most effectively supports the claim that Tharp's discoveries had significant scientific impact? Okay, so we want a quotation that directly states that. Okay, this also means that directly supports it or most effectively does that. So let's look at our answers and see which ones we can eliminate right off the bat. So the first one is working with limited access to research vessels due to greater discrimination. Now, we see that this is not talking about the fact that it is a significant study, rather, it's talking about the obstacles that she actually faced. So I'm just going to eliminate that option. Discovery rate. The second one is in 1952, she discovered evidence of a continuous rift valley. Now, this talks about the discovery date. Okay, it doesn't. It just shows what she found, but it does not show the impact. That is something we're looking for, right? I'm going to eliminate that again. And the next one is option C, which says the mountain. Her maps discovered that this rift was a part of a massive underwater mountain range. Now, this describes the finding, but it does not describe the impact again. Okay, so these are some key details that you want to point out in your answers that might not be the correct one. See, over here, we're talking about a specific significant date. Rather, although we're talking about the finding and the discovery, yet this is just about the how and when she discovered this. This is what she discovered, so we don't want that. We want after discovering this, what was the impact that she created, right? Qalam's work eventually became foundational in evidence for theory of plate tectonics. This is the impact that we're looking for, right? This is the correct option. Now, the phrase foundational for theory directly demonstrates significant um, importance of this scientific evidence, right? So now that we're done with the passages, let's look for purpose and function questions. So these questions ask why author includes specific information. Now this could be about why author mentions that the author mentions X primarily to dish, or it could say the main purpose of the sentence, some specific sentence, is to dish, or examples in line X to Y, or in line uh, something to something. This serves to, okay, this is the purpose or function question, and it is something that a lot of students actually get confused with. So we're going to look at some strategies and words with some examples. So the first one strategy is to identify what the detail is, right? By looking at the question, identify what it says literally. Okay. The next one is to ask why the author included that. What role does that word play? Maybe if I eliminate that role, what difference does that make? The next one is choose the answer that describes the function and not just the content. Okay, it's not just a restatement. So you're going to describe the function. A function again is the purpose of what your answer is, not just a restatement of the answer. Okay, this is a very common thing that you can find in the wrong answers. So just keep that in mind. So let's go through an example question so that we can better understand what we're looking for. Researchers studying bilingualism have found unexpected cognitive benefits. In 2020 study, psychologist Ellen tested bilingual and monolingual adults on attention and task switching abilities. The bilingual participants consistently outperformed monolinguals on a task requiring them to switch between different activities. For instance, when asked to sort objects by color and then by shape, bilingual participants adapted more quickly than to the rule change. These results suggest that regularly switching between languages may strengthen general cognitive flexibility. Okay, so let's see what the question is. The author mentions the task of sorting objects by color and shape primarily too. So it asks what is, so before all of this, let's see what the object of the question is, right? So it is talking about the sorting objects task. So let's see what the sorting objects task is. It wasn't mentioned in the passage, right? So here, when we're asked to sort objects by color and then by shape, they were adapting more quickly. So this is something that the author says, and right after this, we see that it says that these results suggest that regularly switching between these may strengthen your cognitive ability. Now, we see that it is talking about the fact that it wanted to give a concrete example of task switching mentioned earlier. Okay, so now we're going to evaluate the options. Now, let's go to the first one. So, explain how cognitive research is typically conducted. This is not showing the results because we want the results of it, right? We don't want the method. So I'm just going to ignore this answer. The next one is provide a specific example of a task where bilinguals showed advantage. Now we are doing that by talking about sorting of objects. The author is actually trying to give an example of how bilinguals have more advantage than monolinguals. So this is indeed something that we're looking for. I'm just going to mark this as a correct option for now. And Third option is argue that bilingual people are more intelligent than monolinguals. Now, this is again a comparison that is not relevant here, right? It doesn't talk about the fact that bilinguals are intelligent or something like that. It is although stating that they have cognitive flexibility. Rather, it is not talking about the fact that they're intelligent, right? So again, this is again too extreme. There is no comparison like that. So I'm gonna ignore this. And lastly, most important finding. It describes the most important finding of the author's research. Now, most important finding, it doesn't indicate the fact that it is the most important. There is no indication of that in the passage at all, and it doesn't actually state what we're looking for. We want why sorting objects is talking, why the author is talking about switching objects, and we are going to just mark that as incorrect, and we see that the correct option is indeed provide a specific example of the task where bilingual shows significant advantage. Okay, so let's go to another example. The Mediterranean diet has been widely praised for its health benefits. Studies showed lower rates of heart disease among populations following this diet. However, researcher Dr. Maria Santos cautions that genetics and lifestyle factors also play crucial roles. Italians and Greeks who consume Mediterranean foods also tend to walk more, experience less stress, and have strong social support networks. Santos argues that crediting diet alone oversimplifies the relationship between food and health. Okay, the question is the author includes Dr. Santos' perspective primarily too. Now, this is talking about Santos' perspective. So, let's see. What is Santos' perfect perspective? Okay, so that's something we have to highlight in the passage. So it says she says that diet is not the only factor, right? There are other factors like genetics and lifestyle. They play a crucial role in lesser heart diseases. Okay, so why is the author including this perspective, or why is the author talking about this perspective? We see that it is mainly to show that the issue is more complex than just diet. And we see that's directly stated as well, that it is oversimplified by the fact that it's talking about only diet and not about genetics or lifestyle as well. Okay, so this is incorrect. Okay, this is again the main claim of the author. So now let's see why the answers are wrong. So option A says prove that Mediterranean diet is ineffective. Now Santos does not say this because she says that there also matter that diet doesn't work, right? There are other factors as well. So this is not something that she's talking about. Although she said that crediting diet alone, like we see, this option is completely discrediting the fact that diets also have a value. While Santos says that although it does have some kind of value, it is not alone in this. Okay, so that's wrong. The next one is to introduce complexity to the discussion of diet and health. Now, we see that it is saying that it is not, or it is oversimplified, and she wants to introduce the fact that it is not this simple. Rather, it is complex, and it is not only about diet. So, this is for now our correct option. Argue that exercise is more important than diet. Now, this is irrelevant comparison, and we see that Santos says multiple factors that matter, and it is not ranking these factors. She, sorry, she is not ranking these factors. So again, this is wrong. And lastly, support the claim about lower heart disease rates. Now, Santos qualifies this claim by other options and not only by diet. So this is not something that she's doing in this passage. So the correct answer is indeed answer B. Now let's look at the common traps that you can see in these messages. The first one is content versus function, right? Now, content versus function is an idea that let's understand. So, content means what the information says, and function is why the author has included the information. Okay, so you want the answer of function and not content. Now, if you see that the author mentions that ants slow down when food is scarce, this is content. While the function is the author provides an example of how ants respond to environmental changes. Okay. This says why the author has mentioned that, and this says what the author has mentioned. This is not what you're looking for in a purpose question, rather, you're looking for a function of specific quotation. Okay, so the next one is too specific or too general. Now, again, general means there is a broader claim, and you want something that's rather more niche and rather more specific. Okay, uh, it might be like a passage discusses once a specific study, as an example, supporting a broader claim. So don't choose something that describes the most important research because it isn't talking about something like that. And don't choose something that provides information about the research, so it is again too vague. You want something that illustrates a claim with empirical evidence. So for scientific passages, you want empirical evidence in your passage that's stated explicitly. Okay, so now again, very common wrong answer is that something that goes beyond the text. Now, for example, the question might ask, don't choose now you have to understand that don't choose the answers that require assumptions and not supported by the passages themselves. So the passage might say many students prefer online learning. Now the wrong answer is something like they argue the fact that traditional education is obsolete. Now this is wrong because the passage is talking about online learning's importance and not comparing that with maybe traditional education, right? And the fact that it is worthless. So that passage isn't making that argument and it's going beyond the test. It's just based on assumptions. This is something that you have to note in common wrong answers. And lastly, extreme language in answer choices. So by extreme language that we also saw in one of the last examples in previous videos. So we saw that extreme language are words like completely proves, definitely established, the only factor, the best factor, okay, the most important factor, or always results in. Now these are some things that are very extreme, and unless they're stated in the passages, they're usually wrong. Okay. So these are some key. So these are some key um, points that I want to highlight. Is that you want evidence that directly supports the claim, and you want explicit evidence rather than implicit evidence because most of the times the evidence is completely stated in the passage, explicitly stated. So you don't want to make up an evidence when something is already present there. And lastly, it is specific evidence over general statements. Now, this is something very important again. And number four is to match exact claim and not just the broader topic. Okay. So for purpose questions, you have to understand that you want to focus on the function and not the content. You have to think about the role in argument and avoid extreme language. And lastly, consider author's overall perspective and overall um, goal and not these things. Okay, so these are the purposes that you can recognize in a purpose question. Common purposes. Okay, so the first one is to provide examples. Maybe the author is including something to provide examples, or maybe the author is doing saying something to introduce a concept, introduce complexity in a concept or something. And then maybe the author is introducing something to provide a contrast or a difference. The author wants to support the main argument somehow, and the author is qualifying or presenting a limit of the claim, right? And lastly, illustrate with specific examples. The author is trying to illustrate or give an example of something that is again the same as that. And you want to establish credibility of maybe a study or s- something that they found. And lastly is anticipate objections. So these are the kinds of purposes that you can recognize in your purpose questions. So this brings us to the end of final lecture. By the end of this series, you have an idea of the question types of that will be asked in the LCAT and a list of comprehensive strategies that you can follow to answer the questions accurately, along with examples that will help you understand and apply these strategies. Thank you so much.